public policy. So this past year, the selection was particularly competitive, but our speaker today stood out for her accomplishments in and out of the classroom and her research topic. So Dallas Augustine is currently pursuing her PhD in criminology, law, and society at UC Irvine, having also received her master's in urban and regional planning from UC Irvine. Currently, she works as a researcher in both the UCLA Institute for Research on Labor and Employment and the Justice Propulsion Laboratory at UC Irvine. Dallas had a great 2017, and in addition to winning this award, was also awarded the Gil Geis Award for Excellence in Research and the Dynamic Woman Award for Community Engagement, both from UC Irvine. As her recommender nicely put, Dallas has impressed me with her intense work ethic, sharp analytical style, and her focused commitment to public policy reform. And today, Dallas will be talking to us about how formerly incarcerated people overcome barriers to find meaningful work. So please welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Not used to being mic'd, so if at any point you can't hear me, you know. So thank you so much, Kendra, and everybody here. It's an honor to be here. And as Kendra mentioned, today I will be talking to you about navigating barriers to employment for people with a criminal record in what I'll be calling the ways that they have to work around the law. So a quick introduction. What I just said is they have to work around the law. What does that mean? So as I'll describe more soon, people with criminal records find themselves in what I've termed the legal double bind. And that's a state of being legally required to obtain work, but also legally obstructed from doing so. So caught in this constriction where they need to get work but can't. And so what do they do in the face of that? And what my findings will show is that they unfortunately use both legal and extra legal strategies to ultimately try to comply with the law. So not working with it necessarily, not necessarily working against it, but instead working around it in an attempt to comply. And then we'll investigate what these strategies are. So a little background. So employment is a key protective measure against recidivism or reoffending and then returning to prison. So amongst all of the different ways of protecting against that, employment is really one of the most primary ways. And beyond that, what my findings will show is that people want to work, contrary to maybe what some popular common knowledge would be of resisting wanting to work. Formerly incarcerated people want to find legit work, and for a variety of reasons, whether that's to make basic ends meet, food, rent, etc., to repay a variety of debts that I'll talk about more, but including child support, court fees, that type of thing, to keep their parole or probation officer happy and off their back, or to do what Shad Maruna calls making good. So the process of leaving an old life of crime or drug use or whatever it may be behind and instead turning a new leaf and making good. So these are all reasons for really wanting to find quality on the books employment. But unfortunately, there are barriers to work. So for formerly incarcerated people, employers are, maybe unsurprisingly, less willing to hire people with criminal records, especially felony records. Time in prison can lead to the deterioration of job skills, important social networks that might aid in the process of referring to jobs or connecting people with quality jobs, and also can create gaps in your work history on a person's resume that can become challenging or uncomfortable to try to explain. And then also, when people can find work with a felony record, they're often relegated to low-skill, low-wage employment that doesn't necessarily have a career trajectory, what one would maybe say is a job instead of a career. And so back to this concept of the legal double bind. So what I just talked about are both legal and just survival reasons why people want to get work but can't. But then legally, thinking specifically about the law, people are legally required to obtain employment, usually while on probation or parole. So they need to because of the conditions of supervision. Thinking about, in this example, parolees, almost all states, I think all 50 states, have as a mandated condition of parole either actively looking for or maintaining on the books work. Also, some different supervisory agencies, such as like certain drug treatment, housing, other transitional housing facilities, also might require that that people be searching for or working. And then also legal financial obligations. So people need to get on the books work in order to not only pay back their legal fees or child support fees, but they may, actually, yeah, we'll leave it there. So people need to pay those back. But then they're also legally obstructed from being able to obtain employment. So they might be barred from licensure for a variety of different occupations. Those occupations can include jobs in their original field. People that I spoke to in this study worked in all types of positions, from like the medical field to childcare, education, and then found themselves legally barred from being able to return to those positions. Or also they might be legally barred from licensure for other jobs that one would think would be more accessible to someone with a record, like being a barber or working in cosmetology. And also there might be restrictions counterintuitively from community supervision. So despite it being a mandate of parole or probation, restrictions employed by parole or probation could actually prevent people from getting work. So geographic restrictions, maybe the job that they would be able to get is 51 miles away, but they can only go 50 miles, or in a neighboring county, what have you. Also, a job that might have you working side by side with somebody else with a felony record can be against the conditions of parole or probation. And then the requirement to report your record on an application can and often does prevent people from even being considered for employment. So given this double bind, needing to get work but being unable to, how do job seekers navigate it in their quest for good work? So a little bit about the methods for my study. So I performed the study in Orange County, California. It's the third most populous county, sixth most populous in the US. The remaining of that is not that important for what we're talking about. But I focused and did data collection in Santa Ana, which is the nice little red cluster within Orange County right there. And so for my recruitment, what I did is I worked with the OC Sheriff's Department. They have a program called the Early Release Program, and people are able to get what they call a 3-day kick, so 3-day early release from jail, if they willingly participate in any one of a number of programs. So they can participate in like parenting classes, substance use related classes, anything that is offered. The OC jails will then trade that for a 3-day kick. So participants of this program, another perk is that instead of being released in the middle of the night, which is generally what occurs, these participants not only get released early, but they get released by van during the day, sometime between the window of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., which is a huge draw. So these are incentives for a very small, like easy to obtain carrot, essentially. And then they would be dropped off at this facility right next to the parole and probation offices in Orange County, at which point I would meet them and tell them a bit about my study, ask them if they wanted to participate. and then conduct on-the-spot interviews. In exchange, they received a $15 gas card, and surprisingly, despite what I thought was a pretty strong incentive, $15, I approached 192 people, 38 accepted, but unfortunately, they didn't necessarily all meet the requirements, and so ultimately we ended up with a sample of 30. This seems like a very large number, 192 compared to 30, but also considering the fact that I was approaching people at the immediate moment that they were being released, lots of people didn't necessarily want to hang out and just talk to me about work. Like, probably excited to get on with their lives in whatever way. So given that, this number then seems a little bit more reasonable. So the actual sample itself, again, we had an N of 30, so 30 people total. They were all felony record holders. I have an asterisk there because a question that I anticipate will be later on, like, so what were their crimes? What were they in jail for? I don't know. As a rule, I did not ask. Sort of an ethical convention of interviewing criminology that unless that's the item of concern and like the actual piece of data of concern, that it is not it's not my business. And so unless that information was offered up freely by the person, as a rule, I never asked. So I won't be able to answer that question later. They were all 18 years or above. Interestingly, the sample was men and women, something that in hindsight I probably would change. Everybody was arrested and jailed in Orange County, though they were residents of all of the neighboring counties. So we had people from Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and Riverside. No San Diego, though. And then, as you'll see, it was primarily male, about 3/4 male, and then primarily Latinx and white, though we had some people identifying as Black or multiracial. Surprisingly, no Asian American representation in the sample. All right, so for the analysis, all of the interviews were audio recorded and then transcribed by myself. I then coded them using Deduce. It's a qualitative analysis program. And I did it using grounded theory, so I just went in to the transcripts and let whatever themes and interesting subjects emerge, and then I went from there instead of looking for, like, going in with a specific question. I knew that I wanted to figure out what it was like looking for work, but this is the common narrative that I ended up hearing, and so it's what I followed. So, the most interesting part, the findings. So I started off my interviews asking people just to tell me, like, how they felt about the fact that they were going to be looking for work at release. How you doing, friend? It's all right. So asking them, yeah, like, so, all right, you're being released. What are you going to do for work? And unsurprisingly, there was a lot of anxiety, not just about release, but about work in particular. So Turtle, who was 30, said, I've had sleepless nights in my jail cell because my release date was coming up, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Michelle, 24, said, it's kind of scary with the charge that I have on my record now. It's kind of scary to think about work now. I don't know. Right now, I just got out of jail, and I have a little anxiety, and I'm a little emotional. And then she began to cry. And then last, John, when I asked him what his plans were for work, he responded essentially saying he didn't know what he was going to do because working with a felony record, it's like trying to dig myself out of quicksand. So this is the tone that people are exiting jail with and thinking about work, which is, it's bleak. So then trying to figure out the strategies that people employed to work around this environment that they're in, where they know they're against barriers, but know they also want to and need to find work. And there were 3 primary strategies that continually emerged. The first strategy was to attempt to evade the background check at the time of application. The second being to work under the table or off the books, or to turn to less stable means like temp agencies and those sort of placement agencies. And then the third was returning to illicit work in the meantime. So starting with the first one, evading the background check at the time of application. So 29 of 30, almost all of the participants, had at one time already, prior to interview, been denied an employment opportunity specifically because of their felony record. And so given that, eventually being honest about your record starts to become a little less appealing. And so 12 out of 30, which is 40%, then resorted to intentionally lying to employers about their records because of this almost 100% fail rate. Though all 12 of those that reported that they had turned to lying also told me that they had started out being honest before they had decided that they were going to lie about their record. So going in, being honest, failing, and then resorting to lying. So Hank, who's 50, said, all right, in the beginning, they say, be honest, but then I started marking, well, I wouldn't put anything. I'd say, no, I don't have felonies, and I'd hope to God that they didn't check. But then you get to a point where it's at that level. In the beginning, you want to be honest, because you know, he was in AA, and he was going to church, and I'm trying to do the right thing, but you have to be honest. They say, be honest, and you do it. For 6 months, you're looking for a job every day, getting turned down, and eventually you get frustrated, and you start writing no, and you still don't get it because they run a background check. So this, though very emotionally described by Hank here, is really a recurring dynamic that kept hearing from all of my participants. So why lie? There are surprisingly more complicated reasons. So people believed they could win the employer over during an interview. People said, like, if they can just get to know me as the person that I am and that I'm more than just my felony record, then they'll want to hire me. And that's all that the lying needs to get me, is it needs to get me face to face. Or this narrative of made mistakes in the past. Was young, I was 16, did something stupid, but I'm 30 now. So what does that 16-year-old person have to do with me now? Or the surprising turn of events, people saying that actually their criminal record could be an asset to their employer and to their position. So thinking about like the concept of having made mistakes, Casey, 37, said, there's a person that has already paid their time. She's saying she's already been to prison. She served her sentence. So she's already paid their time, and they've already done their due, and now they're asking for a chance. And Ron, who's 21, echoed that sentiment and said, well, I have a felony, and I've been convicted for such and such, but that's my past, and I'm trying to change myself, right, to improve, and this is a start right now. And then Tony, who's 31, was one of the people who was saying that, like, no, my criminal record can actually benefit me and set me apart from other applicants. And so Tony said, so he said the things about making mistakes, but then says, it just shows that I can be more of service to you than somebody who hasn't been through that much tragedy. So his experience shaped him and then make him a better potential employee in his eyes. People also lied because they wanted to be able to get a chance to demonstrate their work ethic. I've heard from many people saying, like, I'm such a hard worker. If you just give me a day or two on the job and you can see how hard I work, then the employer is they're gonna have to keep me. They're gonna absolutely want to keep me. Or that the conviction was just simply not related to the job and is therefore a distraction that is irrelevant in their eyes. So you can think of a variety of examples, but this was also a common refrain of like, my XYZ conviction has nothing to do with this construction job that I'm applying for. Or people saying, hey, I'm lying because simply, frankly, I just need the day of work. Have to get paid, have to make some money somehow. They'd like to do it legally, and so they turn to lying. So, unfortunately, those, as I mentioned before, the 12 who had been honest, found that their honesty was a 100% guarantee of rejection by their employers. But even those who chose to lie didn't have like a guarantee of getting hired. They still reported having mixed results, like 50-50 chance of like anything, getting an interview, actually getting hired, what have you. But arguably that's better than no chance. Or is it? So Dylan, 28, said he had lied and he got hired, and I was like, cool, man. And I went and they showed me around. I met everybody, and it was embarrassing, you know what I mean? When after a couple days, like, man, what happened? I kept calling them, and they sent a letter in the mail, like, sorry, whatever. And then I started looking at it, and it showed why. It was a copy of my background check. They hire me, and then they run it. They'll hire me, I'll work one day, but then they'll let me go. So now I don't even bother. So, like Dylan, even this, the mixed results could then turn into feelings of hopelessness and disappointment, and then choosing not to continue to even attempt to apply for honest work. Second strategy, people work under the table, off the books. It might not be like a taxable job, but it's still an above the board job. All right. So there's some literature out there that says that child support fees in particular can be disincentives for people to work on the books jobs. If your wages are going to get garnished because you owed child support, why not just not work? And so there's an entire literature that supports this concept. But 7 of my 30 participants explicitly said that despite any debts that they had, that they wanted a paper trail. So they wanted something that would track, that they could then build and have paper evidence that they had worked for all these different reasons. So that they could get health insurance, to keep the parole officer happy with evidence that they could show them, to be able to rent or buy a home, because a lot of places you need to be able to provide proof of employment, to regain custody of children, and the court requiring that they be able to show that they were holding down a reliable job. So all of these are reasons for wanting that paper trail. But unfortunately, people were reporting that they found themselves in, when they were able to get work, they were getting work in remedial jobs, like we talked about before, low skill, low wage work, generally outside the person's original field. Or if people still wanted to try to get a paper trail, they might then turn to temporary staffing work. 80 of 30 participants, while they were still trying to get on the books work, relied upon off the books work. So they babysat for family, fixed cars on the side, generally while they were also then turning to temporary agencies or staffing agencies. This was maybe one of the most surprising findings of the entire thing, was people who heavily relied on temp agencies had a really diverse set of experiences around them. So a lot of agencies, people reported, say that they're felon friendly, but then on the ground actually were not, would refer them to jobs that immediately ran background checks and denied people, or where the agency themselves would do the same. And so people really struggled to find temp agencies that really could place people with records. 7 of 30 reported that they had had notably negative experiences with temp agencies. So Dylan, 28, who we've heard from before, was describing his experience with temp agencies generally. He said the jobs that he gets it's temporary work. And that's how the employers get away with saving money, so to speak, like medical and all that stuff. And that's why a lot of companies are teaming up with agencies, the sole sake of hiring temporary workers, because they'll never run out. They don't have to give nobody raises. 1 year, all right, you're gone. Just constantly, it's like a revolving door. Next, 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 next. And he was lamenting the fact that even when he could get placed, he would find that he would be booted pretty quickly for somebody else that was coming in. And so even the few felon-friendly agencies still were not really that reliable. Also, 5 of the 30 reported that they dealt with what they characterized as predatory temp agencies. So not just ones that weren't able to place them, but that also took advantage of the particular job seeker. Largely through what I'll describe more, through placing them in toxic or criminogenic work environments. So those 5 people who found themselves with predatory temp agencies described being either recruited from like a sober living or from a day reporting center, and being recruited actively by this temp agency, who then placed them in whatever space they found themselves in. And so they ended up in this toxic work environment where people were using drugs actively, selling drugs, or where there was rampant sexual harassment. But because of this mounting desperation and the inability to get other quality work, people often felt like they had to remain in these environments. All right, and the third strategy, in the absence of any available on-the-books work, people turned to illicit work. So 16 of the 30 participants expressed that after attempting to find good quality work in an honest way, they eventually gave up. 6 of the 30 just gave up in exchange for some sort of social support, whether that was unemployment or support from family and friends that they were lucky enough to be able to rely on. But unfortunately, 10, so 30% of my sample, an entire third, had to return to available higher paying illegal activities. So all described it as being a last resort. Usually these tales were also interwoven with grappling with homelessness or addiction and relapsing, and then losing a job and returning to crime. But primarily, people pointed to the fact that they returned to extra legal work out of the desperation and hopelessness that had mounted from this process that I described before of constant rejection after reporting their record, like unsuccessful attempts to withhold that information about their record, and then spotty or even predatory experiences with temporary agencies and off-the-books work. So Casey, 37, is explaining this process to us. She says, it gets to a point where you're changing and you're trying to do the right thing and get work and support yourself, and you can't find a job, and you're putting out 10 to 15 applications a day. Something's got to give. It's kind of like you get out and you have the world against you because you got to scramble to find a place to sleep, and after a while, it's kind of like, forget it, I'm just going to go back to what I normally do, because at some point you have to eat, sleep, and normal life things. So wrapping all of that back up before pointing to future directions, what I learned was that people coming out of jail expressed the consistent desire to get on the books work for all of the reasons we mentioned before, to be able to pay off their legal debts, to keep their PO happy and not violate the conditions of their community supervision, to avoid reincarceration, to meet their basic fees and basic needs in a way that allowed them to turn a new leaf. But because they're required to report their record on applications and are getting rejected, and because of all of these other legal obstacles, they're not able to get that good work. And so instead, people turn to lying about their criminal record with mixed results, to having to rely on predatory or unreliable temp agencies with mixed results, or out of hopelessness and desperation, while continuing to still, hopefully, attempt to get good work, to returning to extra legal activities so that they can do, normal life things. So future directions. The current policy movement to ban the box has witnessed incredible success. Large cities, growing states, the federal government implemented some form of the ban the box legislation. For those unfamiliar, ban the box is the movement to remove that requirement, to check if you have a felony record and then report that, to remove that from applications. It looks different depending on where you are, so some it's removing it entirely, some it's putting it to a later stage in the application process. Different fields can have it or not, but this is happening. And what my results show, they support the fact that this can help people get past this gatekeeping function. Because if we see that the first step in this process of giving up, essentially, the first step is being denied 100% of the time because of their record. If we can get people past that gatekeeping function, perhaps then we can stop the rest of this process. And we can prevent that feeling of hopelessness that people reported being the mechanism that caused them to return to crime. Unfortunately, though, this comes with the caveat being that some people will still experience delayed rejection, even with the ban the box legislation. So because of all the different ways that it looks, some will have a background check run later and will still lose work, as we know. All of these different, it's not a fix-all, is what I'm trying to say. It's not the single solution. It's a start, but it's not going to solve this problem. So then the question that I pose is, ban the box is a start for us, but how do we address the longer-term aspects of employment beyond initial hire? So how do we keep people in those jobs once they've got them, if they are qualified and do demonstrate that they are a good fit? So I don't have an answer, but instead I have future directions for research that hopefully will then have some really concrete policy implications. So the project that I'm going to describe right now that I'm moving into started with the issue with the temp agencies, which I found particularly troubling. A woman describing that she had been recruited from her sober living and then was placed in this environment with rampant drug use that was really triggering, but she couldn't leave because she needed that job and she couldn't get anything else. So 5 of 30 people described experiencing this. 5 of 30, it's a very small pool, but that's a large proportion of that pool. So how common is that? And what is it about criminal justice involvement that puts people in this position? We think about the fact that coercive work can happen in a lot of other environments, but rarely think about the ways that it might affect the formerly incarcerated population. So, given that, for my dissertation, I'm planning on investigating that phenomenon of coercive work for people recently released from prison. I'm going to ask, what is the prevalence of people on parole that have ever experienced coercive work, and what's that experience like? Surprisingly, there is almost no research on the subject whatsoever, so this will be one of the first. And then once we know how many people experience this, I'm going to ask, how do people perceive their mandated work requirement? Do they perceive it as additional punishment? Do they really want to work for their own reasons? To get into more of this, the question about why people are motivated to work. Like this study showed, people want to work, but want to unpack that further. And then get another question about how people navigate being caught in this constriction. So with that, I conclude, and thank you so much.
And before we get started on the questions, I just want to present you with this certificate of accomplishment and congratulate you again for being one of our emerging scholars.
Thank you so much. Yay, thank you.